Hi there, my name is Katie Saint. I'm a lead therapist for Fox Valley Autism, and this presentation is on why do children do what they do and how do you fix it? So I think this is the question that every parent wants to know when your kids are acting out and you're stressed out and you just want them to stop and nothing is working. That can be really frustrating. And so I'm here to tell you there's answers to that. The science of ABA has proven functions of behavior and proven strategies for how to fix it. So I want to tell you about those things so that you can have more of an ability to identify why your child is doing what he or she is doing and how to fix it. And hopefully this brings more peace to your home because that's what we all want, right? So I want to start by talking about autism. What is autism? What's common with autism? We all know in this field that every person with autism is different, and if you meet one person with autism, that means you've met one person with autism. But there are overarching themes. So I want to just describe some of the diagnostic criteria that's listed in the DSM. And you'll see variations of these symptoms on people with this diagnosis. So one diagnosis criteria is that the child has social skill deficits or relational deficits. So we see with many of our clients that they just aren't sure how to interact. Maybe they're interacting in a way that's not super appropriate. They don't understand maybe what hurts another person's feelings, things like that. So we work a lot with them to develop those skills so that they can have meaningful relationships. The next one is communication struggles. So you're going to see a huge range of variability on this. We have completely nonverbal kids who can't type or talk or use PECs or iPads or sign languages at all. And then we have kids who can say every word under the sun, but their ability to answer questions accurately or communicate what they're thinking and feeling is a really big struggle. So you're going to see huge variation in this. The next one is nonverbal deficits. So this goes both ways. Reading other people's nonverbals, like how can I tell if you're bored listening to me, or if you're mad or annoyed at me, or if you're really enjoying my company. Sometimes people with autism can't read those nonverbal signs, and so that can get them into trouble. Sometimes people with autism don't understand what they're communicating with their nonverbal body language. So those are common themes that we see and we try to develop. Next is sensory issues. Sensory issues are extremely common, and you can see some kids who are hypersensitive to sensory experiences, lights, sounds, make them uncomfortable, crowded rooms, different things like that can be too much for them. And then we have other kids who seek out sensory, so they like that deep pressure. Sometimes you'll see kids actually harming themselves physically, hitting themselves, different things like that. An adult with autism once described to me that he self-harms. He causes bruises, cuts, pains, things like that because he feels like his body is floating away. He cannot feel the boundaries of his body unless he has a bruise or a cut. So for him, it's actually very settling to have pain because then he can feel the boundaries of his body and it doesn't feel like he's floating away anymore. So that was a really powerful story to me to help me understand what that sensory experience was like for him. And every person with autism is going to experience sensory things differently, so that might not be how your child feels. But that's an example of what one person was willing to share. So the next thing is love for routines and rituals. You'll see a lot of repetitive behaviors in different forms with people diagnosed with autism. Sometimes the rituals are productive and helpful, like a morning routine, for example. We can use this to help the child do what they need to do every day by creating predictable routines that they're comfortable in. But sometimes it causes a problem. Sometimes the routines get so rigid that if they can't complete them, they'll have a meltdown, and then that can be difficult. So the next one is fixed interest. Now this one can really be an asset. Some people have grown up and had careers in their interests that they got really into, and they've made lots of money. You know, people say that Einstein and Steve Jobs and, several other famous people have autism. The creator of Ghostbusters, Dan Aykroyd, had autism, and, he used his special interests to become wildly successful. So this area can really be an asset for your child if we can shape it into something productive. People with autism often are highly intelligent as well. You'll see a lot of people with autism do well academically in school and things like that. So autism has some deficits that I just listed, but I want to acknowledge how many strengths they have. They tend to be loyal, they tend to be honest. There's so many great things about people with autism that if we can shape the deficits, if we can work through some of those struggles, your child could be widely successful, and they're probably very interesting and fun to be around already in a lot of ways, and so we want to bring more of that out. So that's kind of why we do what we do. Everybody who works in our company has a soft spot for people with autism, and we just want to help them be the best that they can be. So now I want to talk about their brain. So I love brain stuff. It's all very interesting to me. And what the research is currently saying about people with autism is that part of their brain is enlarged and that they have less connectors between certain parts of the brain. So the limbic system is in the center of your brain, and it's what controls strong emotions. It's also what helps you feel connected to people. And so if your limbic system is enlarged, that means you're going to have stronger reactions, stronger fear reactions, stronger anger reactions, and also stronger affection. So emotional affection, not necessarily physical, showing you that affection. They're just going to have these strong feelings of being attached to things. And so this can be why you'll see a lot of people with autism commonly making associations very quickly. You do something 2 times in a row, suddenly this is the routine and this is what we have to do every time. Or maybe they'll develop a fear really quickly. This is because of that overactive limbic system. So now, when I said that they have less connectors to certain parts of their brain, the prefrontal cortex is in the front of your brain here, and it is what controls logic and reason and communication. And when your limbic system does not communicate with your prefrontal cortex, that means you feel things strongly and you have no idea why. You're just feeling them. Your limbic system didn't communicate with your prefrontal cortex, so you don't know why you're feeling this way, but you know you feel it strongly, and you're going to do what you need to do to take care of those feelings. So if you don't have your prefrontal cortex to regulate and tell you, whoa, slow down, it's okay, you don't need to be upset, think about the consequences, you're not going to like that outcome, that's what your prefrontal cortex does for you. And so if you don't have that communication back and forth, it's going to be hard to regulate your emotions. It's going to be hard to calm down. It's going to be hard to not overreact. So what we want to do in ABA is build those connectors. This is the cool thing about the brain. If you practice and do things over and over and over again, you will build more connectors. You will physically change the brain. So our brain is constantly changing based on our actions. The behaviors that we do shape our brain. And this can be good or bad. You know, if you tell yourself that you can't do something and you never do it, the pathways in your brain that allow you to do those things and make you good at doing those things, if you never do it, it's going to go away. Those skills will leave you. But if you practice hard at something and you do it over and over again, those connections, those pathways in your brain, they're going to get strong and you're going to get good at it. Practice makes a huge difference. And what's interesting is research is even showing that if you mentally practice in your brain, you don't have to physically do the actions sometimes. You can just picture it as vividly as you can in your brain. And that's building connectors. That's building pathways in your brain to help shape you. So the brain is a powerful thing, and even imagining things in your brain can shape you. So there is so much hope for all people, but especially the kids we work with. You know, we can help shape their brain so that they can function in society fully, so that they can have meaningful relationships and jobs. You know, I can't promise that we can create that for every kid, but we can sure get them a step closer. So let's look at what ABA says about functions of behavior and how to change what's going on with your kiddos. So the very basic concept in ABA is that every behavior has a function. Everything we do because it serves us in some way. Now, we don't consciously think about it a lot of times. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But our body is constantly experiencing the environment and changing its behavior based on how the environment responded. So what I mean by that is, take for example, if you go fishing and you're fishing in the same spot every day and you never catch a fish. Well, the function of your behavior there is to catch a fish. And if you never catch a fish there, you're going to change your behavior. And that's going to be a more conscious example, but it happens more unconsciously when interacting with people, for example. Who you connect with has to do with how reinforcing they are to you, how, what they do and say and act like connects with you in some way, and so you're more likely to interact with them. A lot of times we don't think about, well, I like these 4 things about this person, so I want to talk to them more. Sometimes we do that, but a lot of times it's just this unconscious process. So literally everything we do is shaped by these patterns. So let's look at the 4 functions of behavior. So the first one is want. We want something. So most people go to work not because they love work, but because they want a paycheck. The function of working is to get a paycheck for a lot of people. Um, in kids, a lot of times you'll see that they will have a behavior to get what they want. They might cry, hit, scream, or ask, hey, can I have a cookie? You know, and so want is commonly a function of behavior. The next one is escape. They want to get out of something. So what this can look like, maybe you've seen this in your workplace. A boss tells an employee, hey, I want you to do this. And the employee doesn't want to do it, and so they say, like, oh, I don't have time, or no, thank you. You know, so that's maybe more appropriate escape behavior. But in kids, a lot of times we'll see them being silly to get out of something, or we'll see them throw something or cry or say, I need a hug. And so, you know, we see all these different behaviors that kids are trying to do to escape. And so if we identify it as escape behavior, we need to not let them escape, because this is the way behavior works. If the function is successful, the behavior is going to keep going. So if the child's doing that to get out of something and then you allow them to get out of it, the child's likely to do it again. They're likely to keep doing that behavior to escape. But if you make that behavior ineffective, if you make it not work, like, okay, every time I throw something, I still have to finish my homework, well, then I'm less likely to throw something because the function didn't work. So next is attention seeking. Attention seeking behavior is very common between kids and parents, especially kids constantly have a need for parental attention, and some kids need it more than others. And sometimes kids are a bottomless pit. I don't know if your child is like this, but I've worked with a lot of kids who literally their parents could spend all day with them and take a 5 minute break and the kid still is craving their attention. So we see that a lot and it can be tough for parents. But it's super important if a child is acting out inappropriately to get your attention that you ignore it. You act like you can't even tell it's happening. That's going to teach the child when I have inappropriate interactions with my parents or people around me, it doesn't get me attention. We want them to get attention through appropriate behavior. So then the next function is internal. This is the toughest behavior to shape because we can't control whether or not it gets reinforced if the reason it's being reinforced is internal. So this can be sensory stuff, this can be medical stuff, this can be preference. Like take for example, I chew a lot of gum and there's no function to me chewing gum other than I like it. I also like blankets. Even in the summer when it's warm, I'm covered up with a blanket. That just feels good to me. So this is an internal function. So if we want to change that in our children, a lot of our children have sensory or what we call STEM behaviors that are problematic. Sometimes they hurt themselves and we want to shape this behavior. So it's really tough because we can't make it not feel good to them, but we can reinforce the absence of it. Take for example, one kid played with a straw really, like he was noisy about it and it kind of irritated his family. They got sick of hearing the straw tapping all the time. And so we picked a time and a place where the child was allowed to play with the straw. But then we would reinforce him for congratulations, you went 10 minutes without straw tapping during the non-straw tapping time. And so we were able to shape where and when he could do it, and we rewarded him when he followed our rules about that. So that was an example of a successful case where we were able to change that internal behavior. Sometimes you actually need to seek medical attention. We've had several situations. There's a huge connection between autism and gut issues. So lots of our kids have constipation, lots of our kids have just gastrointestinal issues. And so we've had to go to the doctor on several occasions to get kids' medical situation fixed, and that completely took care of behaviors. We've had medication cause an increase in behavior before, and so adjusting the meds solved the problem. So when the function of the behavior isn't super clear and behavior interventions aren't going away, a lot of times we need to check things out medically to make sure that the child's okay internally. So now I want to talk about common strategies that we use to fix behavior, to help shape it into something more appropriate. So there's something that contingencies is a term we use a lot in ABA, and we're constantly looking at contingencies. And what I mean by that is the consequences. When I do this, what happens? If I yell and scream and my mom's really tired and she just wants me to stop screaming, I know I'm going to get what I want. So the contingency in place there is scream long enough that mom is exhausted so she gives me something. Then finally mom gives in, gives you what I want. Sweet, it worked. I'm going to keep doing that. So we want the contingencies to be in place in our favor, not problem behavior favor, if that makes sense. So what I mean is we need to reinforce the good behaviors. We want the contingencies to support when I'm appropriate, I get what I want. So also we have to look at learning histories. If for 10 years my child yelled and screamed at me and I gave him what he wanted, changing that behavior is going to take a long time. And I'm going to have to be really consistent for a long time with my new contingency. Okay, I'm done. I'm not going to reinforce your screaming and crying to get what you want anymore. So the child's going to try hard and be like, wait, like for the last 10 years, you gave me what I want when I cried. So why aren't you doing it now? I'm going to cry louder. I'm going to cry harder. Maybe I'm going to throw something too because my last 10 years of learning said you're going to give in. So what's going on here? So we need to remember that. This is called an extinction burst when the problem behavior gets worse before it gets better. Because we're trying to change this child's world. We're trying to change what's normal to them. And they're going to test that. Remember, people with autism like routines. And so we're changing their routines. And this can be hard. But it's so important so that we can get the appropriate behaviors out of them. They're capable of it. They're capable of appropriate behavior, absolutely. But we are the ones who need to make sure our responses to them support appropriate behaviors and don't support the inappropriate ones. So there's something called extinction. When you no longer reinforce a problem behavior, say the function is attention and you're ignoring it, that's called putting the behavior on extinction. And so this is a 30-year research topic that has been proven consistently works every single time if you do it right. So that's what's really cool about ABA. There's a lot of principles that we've discovered are what we call lawful, that if you do it right, every time it will work, every single time. And so I think that's really cool. Sometimes we can't control all the variables. Sometimes being human and having so many things going on, you can't do it perfectly, right? And so then we don't always get the results that we want. But when we are in control of those variables and we can do it the way the research says to do it, we will get those results. So that's really cool and really hopeful. So next I want to talk about reinforcement. Reinforcement is so important. And reinforcement is what increases behavior. So by definition in ABA terms, reinforcement is something that increases behavior, makes it more likely to happen. Behavior does not increase without reinforcement. So a lot of times parents will tell us, I don't want to reinforce my child for doing something that they should be doing anyway. Well, if they're not doing it, that means to them it's not reinforcing currently. So we need to create artificial reinforcement, whether it's toys or games or food or whatever, so that that behavior becomes a good thing to that child. And then over time, we fade it out and we make it so that the child doesn't need that external reinforcement anymore. But sometimes we need to do that up front. So currently I'm working on my PhD in behavior analysis, and I had to do some research. And my research was on combining reinforcement with extinction to eliminate the extinction burst. So now remember I mentioned extinction burst earlier. That's when the problem behavior gets worse before it gets better. And so what I wanted to do with my research was eliminate the getting worse part, because that's no fun. That's a really stressful time for families and therapists alike. We're trying so hard to be consistent and get rid of that behavior and replace it with something good, but the child is really testing that and making, really taking it up a notch. And so what I found in my research is that if you use extinction and a reward system at the same time, you can prevent that. So now remember, extinction is blocking the function. So an example, if the child is hitting to get out of homework, and you just say, nope, we're doing homework. I don't care if you hit me, but you need to finish your homework. I'm just going to ignore your hitting and we're going to get back to homework. And the child finishes his homework. And then the next day you do the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. Well, rewarding the child, hey, you did your homework. That's awesome. Let's go have ice cream. Let's have a movie night tonight because you did your homework. So you're reinforcing the behavior you want to see more of, and you're ignoring the behavior you don't want to see. You're not allowing that to work. When you combine those two things together, the extinction burst doesn't happen, and the replacement behavior happens faster, and the problem behavior goes away faster. So that is the most effective way to change behavior, when you combine reinforcement and extinction. So I want to give you a few more examples just from everyday life. So I do a lot of work with a homeless outreach, and there's a man who really likes to touch my hair, and I don't want to be touched. And so, but it was clearly attention-seeking behavior. He did this to seek out my attention, and so I recognized that. And so every time he would touch my hair, I would simply walk away. I'd ignore it. I would pretend I didn't notice. I would maybe start talking to somebody else. So this hair touching behavior that he had went away in about a week of interacting with him. It was pretty quick. It was really effective. So that's just a small example of how attention-seeking behavior worked in everyday life. And I used extinction by ignoring him and not talking to him when he would touch my hair. But then when he was appropriate with me, when he would say, "Hey Katie, how's it going? How was your day?" Then I would engage with him, and I would say to him, "How are you?" And we'd interact and have fun. So I was intentional about ignoring the attention-seeking behavior, but then reinforcing the good behavior that I wanted to see more of. So the next example I want to give is a little boy who I worked with that had some pretty major problem behavior. He wasn't a violent kid, but then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he became violent, and he was hitting people. And his mom was distraught. She's like, "What's happening to my son? Well, why is he acting like this?" And so we came in and we did what's called a functional analysis. Now, a functional analysis is when you set up conditions and test the functions of behavior. So we would do certain things and just test how he responded to it. And so what we learned through this functional analysis was that the function of the behavior was internal. It wasn't because he wanted something. It wasn't because he was trying to escape. It wasn't because he wanted attention. He did it because it felt good. So we looked into that more, and it turned out he had massive cavities in his mouth. He was in pain. And so this behavior that he suddenly started doing out of the blue was because of the pain So his mom took him to the dentist and got his teeth fixed, and he was okay. The violence stopped. So this was really great news for the parents because that got rid of the behavior. Medical intervention is typically going to be much faster than a behavior plan that we write where you have to do all these trials and do it for several weeks or months sometimes to get the behavior to go away. So that's something worth mentioning too. It's really important that you understand that some behaviors take a long time to go away, and you have to be really consistent for weeks, months to get certain behaviors to go away if they've been happening for a long time. So that can be really tough and exhausting sometimes because sometimes it's easier to give in. I'm a parent myself, and sometimes I come home and I'm exhausted and my kid is acting out inappropriately and I just want to sit on the couch. And it's hard sometimes to be consistent all the time. So I want you to know, as a therapist and a parent, I understand how hard it is. But unfortunately, if we want to see those good behaviors, if we want to get rid of the problem behaviors, we need that consistency and that endurance to push through so we can see the behaviors that we want more of. So the next example that I want to give is more of an everyday example. Um, so perhaps you guys remember in high school the popular group or the different people pursuing other people. You're going to notice there's always somebody who's pursuing somebody out of their league. And sometimes that gets reinforced and they're successful and they're happy because they got somebody that they wanted. But a lot of times you're going to see people getting rejected. High school is just the most vivid example of this, where hormones are running wild and people are pursuing everyone. So this is why I bring this up as an example. If you ask somebody out over and over again and they keep saying no, they're eventually going to stop. People don't like to be rejected, and it's not working. The function of that behavior ended. In high school, you're also going to see a lot of attention-seeking behavior. People doing goofy things to get attention. High school is just such a vivid example of all functions. So take escape behavior. People don't want to do their homework, so they're acting out in class. And oftentimes schools will kick kids out of class for inappropriate behavior. And so then that function gets reinforced as well. Um, you know, Lots of times in schools you're going to see the functions of behavior very vividly. Attention seeking, wants, especially with phones nowadays. Kids want their phones, they want access to them, and so they're doing different behaviors to get that. So if we get really good at identifying function, remember, escape, want, attention seeking, or internal. If we get good at identifying the function, blocking it, and then reinforcing the behavior that we want to see instead, we are going to transform our home life. We are going to have a more peaceful life if we are good at reinforcing the things we want to see more of and ignoring the things that we don't want to see. So this is hard. It takes a lot of effort and intentional thought, but it works. It really, really works. And so if you want more practice with this, talk to your therapist. A lot of families will set up training times where they practice doing these things. And a lot of times parents will ask therapists, will you please label the functions of behavior when you see it around me so that I can get better at identifying it? That's something we would be happy to do for you. So whatever way we can support you, we want to. We're here to change kids to help them improve, to help you guys have better quality of life. So if you can think of a way that we can support you, we want to do it. This is what we're passionate about. So I hope you found this presentation helpful. If you want to know more, you're welcome to contact me. My email address is ksaint@foxvalleyautism.com. That's KSAINT@foxvalleyautism.com. All right, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Hopefully I'll meet you guys soon.